Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is the course on linguistics and the paper is called Morphology and Syntax. I'm called Prabal Dasgupta. I work in the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. Today we are going to cover the 13th module, which is called Revisiting Traditional Syntax. In the earlier module, module 12, we had talked about a variety of tools from traditional grammar, including parts of speech and various functional or relational concepts such as complement, adjunct, modifier, head, and so on. This time, we shall focus first on how traditional grammar dealt with the structure of the clause and with relations between clauses. What is a clause? So far we have used the terms phrase and sentence. We have not talked about the term clause. One of my teachers had a good definition of the clause. He used to say a clause is a phrase that contains a finite verb. That is an excellent definition because it leaves undisturbed the idea that the bigger umbrella will be called the sentence and that you never talk about a sentence containing other sentences. But that is not how many other grammarians talk. Many other grammarians say in an example like John thinks that Mary is asleep. The bigger sentence, John thinks that Mary is asleep, contains the smaller sentence, Mary is asleep. So for those grammarians, the term sentence is ambiguous between the larger object within which everything is included and the smaller one, Mary is asleep. Other people, like that teacher of mine, would say Mary is asleep is a clause, and it's a clause that's a constituent of the larger sentence. John believes that Mary is asleep. This is a matter of terminology, not very much turns on it, but it is best that you be advised at this stage. Traditional grammarians consistently use the term clause for something like a sentence which is contained in another sentence. For these clauses, as they saw them, traditional grammarians had a whole battery of tools for describing how the clauses are inserted or incorporated into the larger structure. For us, the simplest way to talk about what is happening with these clauses is to apply the same classification of constructions and talk about endocentric and within endocentric coordinating and subordinating. So it is easiest for us to talk about subordinate clauses and coordinate clauses. You may have heard these concepts yourselves in the context of learning grammar in your grade school. So you will be familiar with the idea that John is happy and Mary is sad is a case of two coordinate clauses. John is happy is one clause, Mary is sad is another clause, and the conjunction and is a marker of the coordination which puts the two clauses together into a sentence. That is a fairly straightforward matter and you understand how to handle it. We will use this opportunity to point out to you that traditional grammarians had a technique of analyzing a sentence which was known as parsing a sentence. The verb is to parse, P-A-R-S-E, and meant dividing into the parts. So parsing a sentence like John is happy and Mary is sad involves doing some kind of diagram. Some people draw boxes, other people draw trees. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you prefer boxes, then there is a huge box for the whole sentence. John is happy and Mary is sad, within which you have two smaller boxes. The left-hand side box says John is happy, the right-hand side box says Mary is sad, and there's an and in the middle between the two boxes. That's one way to do it. Some people like boxes, other people like circles, other people draw trees. It doesn't really matter what notation you use, provided that you're comfortable with it. So this is a method of parsing a sentence into two constituent clauses. In this case, the clauses are coordinated with each other. When they are coordinated, there is very little to say, other than point out that there is a marker, in this case and. Sometimes a clause is not coordinated with another clause, but it becomes a member of a subordinating construction. In such a case, we call it a subordinate clause, which means a clause that is a dependent of some kind of head. And the question then is going to be, what is the head on which that clause depends? Now, in the last module, we showed you a lot of head-dependent relationships where the dependency is marked in the languages you're familiar with on the dependent. The marking on the dependent can take the form of attaching a functor to the dependent. For example, interested in this tiger has the head interested, and the dependent in this tiger is marked by the functor in. The task of in is to show that interested is connected to this tiger through that functor. In other languages, the richly inflected languages such as Sanskrit, you get, for example, a case ending on the dependent, and the case ending shows that there is a dependency connection between that dependent and the head. For example, if you want to say is afraid of the tiger, in Sanskrit is afraid comes out as vibheti, and of the tiger comes out as vyagrat. Vyagrat appears in the ablative case, which the Sanskrit grammarians called panchami vibhakti, and it is in the singular number, so ekavachana. So those were examples that morphologically tell you who is the head and who is the dependent. In the present module, we are talking about clauses which are dependent on a head. There is one difficulty in expanding what we said earlier into the case of clauses, namely, the fact that a clause is dependent cannot be shown by inflection, because you cannot inflect a clause. Where would you show the inflection? You can't take a clause and attach a case marker to it. You cannot take a clause and put a preposition on it. You can't do these things. Therefore, that a clause is dependent has to be inferred indirectly from other things you know about the construction, which is why it is a slightly harder exercise. In this lesson, we are going to look at many examples of clauses and their dependence. Before we go to that level of the exercise, it is good to get used to parsing as a whole. When traditional syntax performed parsing, parsing didn't merely involve taking a big sentence and finding the smaller clauses that are constituents of the sentence. It also meant that you take a clause and you find where is the subject, where is the predicate, and you break up the subject into its pieces and the predicate into its pieces, and all the time you keep track of the part of speech to which each word belongs and the head dependency relations between one constituent and another constituent, and show all that in your diagram, however you draw your diagram. That is the task of parsing. Let us look at an exercise we've given you in which we ask you to do some parsing in your own style, whatever you prefer, boxes, circles, trees, we don't care what your notation is. We want you to look at the sentence, old men and women irritate John. Now, the reason that this sentence is of grammatical interest is not about John, we don't know who John is, not about the old men and women, we don't know who they are. It is about the grammar of the sentence. Old men and women irritate John is ambiguous. Surely you can see how it is ambiguous. It is ambiguous between women and old men irritate John, that is one meaning. The other meaning is old men and old women irritate John. When you say old men and women, it is unclear whether you are applying the adjective old only to the constituent men or to the entire coordination men and women. Now, to bring out that ambiguity, all that you have to do is parse this very simple sentence, old men and women irritate John. It doesn't have that many pieces. You don't have to do that much work to parse it. Obviously, while talking to you in this exposition, we will not do the parsing for you because there's an exercise given to you. It's a very simple exercise. We are merely pointing out that the reason we are giving you this exercise is that when you try to do the parsing, you will find yourself having to state in your diagram whether you're attaching old just to men or whether you're attaching old to the entire phrase men and women, which has men and women as two distinct heads that are put together in a coordinating construction, and where the marker and is a conjunction marking the status of the conjunction, marking the status of the construction as a coordinating construction. That is one aspect of parsing. We are not doing parsing for its own sake, by which I mean traditional parsing of the kind that you must have learned how to do in high school. We are looking at these healthy practices of traditional grammarians so that we can express those insights in a format that is more in keeping with our needs in the 21st century. We want to now develop a much richer understanding that goes beyond what the traditional grammarians were able to do. But for that, the foundations must be laid by following those aspects of traditional grammatical practice which were sound, which were healthy, which are worth emulating. That is why we begin with this. We now move to an area where traditional grammarians did not really get a grip on the facts. We move to the behavior of the verb. In Indian languages, we are used to the idea that a verb is inflected for tense and that the system of tenses comprises 3 tenses: the past, the present, and the future, corresponding to 3 points of time. It is easiest to illustrate this from Marathi. Consider a boy called Dilip and imagine that he is crying. You can say Dilip rarla, Dilip rarto, or Dilip rarel. Dilip rarla means Dilip cried, Dilip rarto means Dilip cries, and Dilip rarel will mean Dilip will cry. I'm sorry, it means Dilip will cry. This is a simple system of tenses. It is found in many languages. At the same time, you need to realize that even though our understanding of time as human beings involves the past, the present, and the future, the way language encodes time is not consistent. There are many, many languages in which you don't have 3 tenses in the morphology the way Marathi has 3 tenses in the morphology. Consider English. In English, if you compare the past Dilip cried and the present Dilip cries with what we call the future Dilip will cry, you find that Dilip will cry uses an auxiliary will, which is not at all an inflection on the verb like the ed of cried or the es of cries. The fact that it's an auxiliary gives you a signal. Actually, when you look at the English verbal system, you discover English does not have a future tense in its system of tenses. The future time in English is expressed by using an auxiliary, most of the time will, sometimes shall. There is some complication about when to use will and when to use shall, which we will not go into. Remember from the earlier lessons that in present-day linguistics, we are not following the notional approach of traditional grammar. We are following the distributional approach. We are looking at actual words, the markings on the words, how they're related to their neighbors in terms of the facts that can be verified by inspecting these words and these markings. That is called the distributional approach. So when we follow the distributional approach, it turns out that our system of tenses for the English verb cannot recognize a future tense because there is no inflection on the verb indicating the future time. Marathi has a future tense, rarel. Esperanto has ploris, cried, ploras, present tense cries, and ploros, future will cry. Ploros clearly has a future tense inflection os on the verb. So Esperanto is like Marathi. It has 3 tenses in its inflection. English is not like Marathi or Esperanto. English has 2 tenses, present and past. What do you mean by this? What is going on when you claim that English has 2 tenses but is expressing 3 times? You're not denying that English expresses a future time by using the auxiliary will, do you? You're making a distinction between time as a category of meaning and tense as a category of grammar. English grammar does not have a future tense. In order to understand more clearly the status of English auxiliaries, it is best to compare English with Indonesian. You see, the Indonesian language, also called Bahasa Indonesia, expresses plurality of the noun, not inflectionally but syntactically. How does it do it? Consider English house and houses. In Indonesian, the singular house comes out as one word, rumah. Rumah means house in the singular. When you want to say houses in the plural in Indonesian, you don't have a plural inflection. What do? You say rumah, rumah. So by repeating the word rumah in Indonesian, you express the plurality of the noun. Now in terms of grammatical structure, you can treat these two, if you wish, as the same syntactic sequence. You can imagine that in English syntax you have two elements, plural followed by house. In Indonesian syntax you have two elements, plural followed by house. In English, the instructions of the grammar are, when you see the syntactic element plural, make sure that there is a plural inflection on the noun to its right. In Indonesian, the instruction is, when you see the element plural in the syntax, take the noun on the right and repeat it, express it twice. Now, we are not telling you that this is the correct analysis of the syntax of plurality in Indonesian and English. We are giving an example of the resources that can be used to address mismatches in the interface between morphology and syntax. Now we will persist with Indonesian. In Indonesian, when we wish to say Dilip will cry, the way to say it is Dilip akan menangis. The nga between na and is written ng in the standard spelling of Indonesian. Akan can be compared with the English will. So in a rough and ready approximate gloss, you will gloss Dilip akan menangis by saying Dilip will weep. However, it is misleading to push that gloss up to the point of saying that English will is identical to Indonesian akan. Why is English will as an auxiliary different from the Indonesian auxiliary akan? What is grammatically or syntactically different between akan and will? The answer lies in the fact that the English auxiliary will is marked for the present tense. How do you know this? You know this because it can be contrasted with the auxiliary would, which is exactly like will, except that would is marked for the past tense, where will is marked for the present tense. We can demonstrate this by giving you examples from an English phenomenon called the sequence of tenses phenomenon. If you consider the sentences, the experimenter observes that the magnet attracts the iron filings. When you put that in the past, you get the experimenter observed that the magnet attracted the iron filings. So when you change the first verb from observes present tense to observed past tense, the subordinate clause verb changes from attracts present tense to attract past tense. This phenomenon is called the sequence of tenses effect, or the sequence of tenses phenomenon. Another example to drive it home and to bring it back to our example will. Suresh predicts that inflation will rise rapidly is in the present tense. When you put predicts in the past tense, you get Suresh predicted that inflation would rise rapidly. Here you can see that will and would take part in the same pattern as attracts and attracted. Now everybody knows that attracts is present tense and attracted is past tense, so now you can see that will is marked for the present tense and would is marked for the past tense. Now I don't know enough Indonesian to give you translations of Suresh predicts that inflation will rise rapidly in Indonesian, but I can wager that will comes out as akan in the corresponding Indonesian sentence, and that when you move from the present to the past and try to say Suresh predicted, Indonesian will say Suresh predicted that inflation akan rise rapidly. Akan doesn't change. That much I know about Indonesian. So the difference between English will and Indonesian would is that, English will and Indonesian akan, is that Indonesian akan doesn't carry tense marking. It expresses future time. That is the meaning of the element akan. I'm not saying it is non-committal about time. I'm saying it does not carry a syntactic feature of tense. Indonesian morphology does not have tense. Indonesian verbs do not have a tense system. Indonesian verbal complexes express the semantics of time. Of course, like most other human languages, they use the same present, past, future trifurcation of our understanding of time, though there are some languages which encode it differently. Indonesian works with 3 times. It does not work with 3 tenses. English works with tense. English has 2 tenses, present and past. There is no future tense. The future time is expressed by a present tense auxiliary will or shall. That is how things work. We now move to another aspect of the verbal system, which is really called aspect. You know about aspect. In school grammars, you have not been taught the term. What is aspect? If you recall, in your school grammar, you were taught that the present tense in English breaks up into present indefinite, John laughs. Present progressive, John is laughing. Present perfect, John has laughed. Present perfect progressive, John has been laughing. You were also taught that these perfect and progressive type concepts apply both to the present tense and to the past tense. Past tense, past indefinite, John laughed. Past progressive, John was laughing. Past perfect, John had laughed. And past perfect progressive, John had been laughing. What do we call perfect and progressive? This was a question you never asked as a school child, and your school teacher probably never answered the question because it didn't come up. They are called aspects. Just as present, past are called tenses in the grammatical system, likewise perfect and progressive are called aspects, and English even has a composite aspect which puts the two together. It has a perfect progressive aspect, which is unusual in the world's languages. Many languages of the world have perfect, they have progressive, but do not have perfect progressive. English has a combination. These things are called aspects. Now, aspects are also connected to time, but they are connected to time differently from the way tense is connected to time. This is going to be a secret. We will not tell you about it because we have set you an exercise. You can go and find out on your own. The third major verbal category handled by the grammar is called mood. Mood is a bit complicated. The term is used differently by different authors. For your immediate purposes, we suggest that you do something very simple. There are some English auxiliaries of which will is an example, but if you look further afield, you will find that will has the same properties as can, must, may, and so on. These are often called modal auxiliaries, or modal for short. These modals, will, would, can, could, must, must, ought to, may, these are together called modals. They express mood. One of the senses of the term mood is whatever it is that these auxiliaries express, the ones that are called modal. Now you will find this confusing initially because you will say, but we thought that will and shall express future time. Now you are telling me they express mood. What are you talking about? Are you mixing up mood and time? You see, mood is a grammatical category. Mood is a concept around which the grammar of a language organizes its syntactic and morphological resources. Just as time is in the semantics but tense is in the grammar, likewise there are various semantic concepts that correspond to the grammatical category of mood. English mood is organized around the system of modal auxiliaries. This is something you have to accept. You have to work with this. You will object that we are missing out on the point that English has imperatives. Several chapters later, we will show you that imperatives are deeply connected to the modal auxiliary will. you will scream that that makes no sense. We just told you that the modal auxiliary will denotes the future tense. Yes, it denotes the future tense, but there are some occasions on which it has to do with the imperative and not with the future tense. I'm sorry, with future time. Example, shut the door, will you? Shut the door, won't you? In these sentences, there is what is called a tag question, will you or won't you, to the right of the sentence. But the main body of the sentence is imperative, shut the door. You can see that the imperative is echoed by something that has the same properties in the grammar of English. How do you know this? Well, compare this with a past tense sentence. I shut the door, didn't I? You shut the door, didn't you? Where you see the tag question echoing the past tense of the main body of the clause. The Darwan always shuts the gate, doesn't he? Present tense echoed in the tag. So you can see that the properties of the main body of the clause are echoed in the tag. So when you look at the imperative clause, shut the door, won't you? You can see that will and won't, the negation of will, are connected to the imperative in sentences where surely you will agree that the sentence is in the imperative mood. So as you can see, there is evidence leading us to say that English mood is handled by the modal auxiliaries, and that is your best initial approximation to understanding how mood is organized. This is not to say that mood is organized in the same way in all languages of the world. There are languages such as Sanskrit where mood is organized in terms of inflections on the verb. That's fine, that's how Sanskrit works. English works differently. English puts it in the auxiliaries. This is one of the things you have to understand about how tense, aspect, mood are organized in the languages of the world. Aspect is organized in English by having these auxiliaries have and be. Aspect is organized in Russian by having some morphological markings on the verb itself. That's one of the differences between English and Russian. The last grammatical category that we need to mention to give you a fairly complete table of contents for the story is a category called voice. Voice is a grammatical category connected to the verbal system, which has two elements in the system. They're called active and passive. I'm not saying that all voice systems are organized only around active voice and passive voice. There are some systems where there is a third voice called the middle voice. We will not go into the complexities of the middle voice. It is a minority phenomenon. Only some languages of the world have a middle voice. Most languages have a simple voice system in terms of active and passive. If we start talking about how the passive is organized in the auxiliary system, you will get hopelessly confused. Most syntax courses that are based on the English language, in the first few lessons of syntax, try to teach you how the English auxiliary system functions. We had better warn you at the very start that this syntax course does not follow that pattern of teaching. We will teach you how English auxiliaries function about 15 lessons down the line when you're nearly finished. Why? Because the English auxiliary system is syntactically one of the hardest parts of English syntax. It is a very elementary principle of teaching that as far as possible you begin with simple points and move towards complicated points. If we begin with the English auxiliary system, you will find syntax impossible. You will run screaming out of the room. We don't want that to happen. So for most of the lessons, you will find our diagrams just showing you awks and having some pitiful, meager, limited information under awks, roughly saying, you know, that part of the sentence is the auxiliary. Please bear with us, we'll tell you more about it in future. That part of our computer is down. We will keep saying that for 10-15 lessons. We believe you'll find that this doesn't get in the way. You can handle the rest of the sentence bit by bit easy bit by easy bit, get comfortable with the sentence, and finally approach the sanctum sanctorum of the auxiliary when you're ready for it. That is why we are not trying to do active voice and passive voice immediately at all. We are merely mentioning that your complete picture of the sentence is going to require engagement with voice also. When you get there, we will announce it very loudly and clearly, don't worry. Voice is not going to hide. It is now time to look in some detail at what got done in this module and what did not get done. We are revisiting traditional syntax. In fact, we are wrapping up all the harvesting we want to do from traditional grammar by revisiting traditional syntax. To the extent that we are looking at how traditional syntax carried out parsing, especially parsing that identifies clauses within a bigger sentence and finds out which of the clauses is coordinated with other clauses and which of the clauses is subordinated to some portion of another clause. When a clause is subordinated to some portion of another clause, in the technical terms we've been learning recently, that clause is a dependent and it requires a head on which it is dependent. So you then have to find the head. Parsing involves finding the head when the clause is a dependent. Parsing for coordination involves identifying each of the coordinate clauses and finding the marker like and or that puts the coordinate clauses together into a coordinating construction. These are the simple tasks that we have shown you how to do in the exercises. In addition to showing you these simple tasks, we have also stated, without unpacking it in the form of exercises as yet, because you will not have the equipment to do the exercises, we have stated that traditional syntax also used to do parsing of the clause itself. It used to break up the clause into the subject and the predicate and then unpack the predicate and unpack the subject. Since you cannot do everything at once, we showed you the first step that is involved in unpacking the predicate. In English, the predicate is unpacked as auxiliary followed by the rest of the predicate, usually a verb phrase. The auxiliary contains elements in English that handle what is called mood, elements that handle what is called tense, elements that handle what is called aspect. These are grammatical categories affecting the verb. In some languages, such as Sanskrit and Russian, these grammatical categories affect the verb very directly in the morphology. The word, the verb word itself carries inflections which express mood and tense in Sanskrit. The verbal word carries other morphological markings which are not exactly inflections in Russian to express aspect. In English, however, mood, aspect, and quite a bit of tense are handled by the auxiliaries, not by the verb itself. For simplicity, in this module we have shown you how the verb itself handles tense in words like attracts and attracted, and how sometimes a modal auxiliary handles tense. The word will and its past tense form would are examples of that. We have not shown you how the work done by the verb and the work done by the auxiliary interact. That is a very advanced topic. It is part of why the English auxiliary system is very complicated. We will handle that very advanced topic about 15 lessons down the line. Please don't hold your breath. It is not going to happen anytime soon. You'll reach nearly the end of the course before that happens, because this is a very difficult topic. We are trying to begin with what is easy and then move to what is hard. Because syntax is messy, it is difficult to imagine, dear learner, what you individually are going to find easy and what you individually are going to find difficult. Ideally, we should have different courses for different sections of learners. We should get your feedback, find out what you find easy, what you find difficult, and then arrange our grading in such a way that what you find easy is dealt with first and what you find hard is dealt with afterwards. But alas, as you know, dear learner, there are millions of you. We don't really have the resources to organize our course structure into 25 different variants of the course for 25 sections of the public just yet. But if you bear with us, if you send your feedback, maybe we will design different variants of the course and make it more user-friendly. You'll have to show us how to do it. And the first step is finding which parts of the course are badly graded for you, reporting to us those cases where you can see that we have done something difficult early and something easy much later, then point that out to us and we'll try to improve the course. So that was what we did in this module. The module is better brought out in the e-text. There are obviously certain things that the text can say properly that we cannot orally explain to you. So please go to the e-text for those details and please follow up suggestions for further reading that you find. Thank you for your attention.